Hello, it's Matthew here from Matthew North Music. Just thought I'd give you a little review, or not so much a review, just my thoughts about the new six-part drama called Pistol, which is the dramatised version of the history of the Sex Pistols. Now, I own this, as do many other people, and this is the only punk album I own. I've got a massive record collection. Only thing that would fall under punk is this, and it's it's a fairly early original Virgin pressing, and it's one of these records where it's absolute, banger after banger all the way through. You don't need me to tell you how great this record is because you probably own it yourself, but it is a brilliant record. And as a live band, because I did get to see them in 2007, I thought as a live band they were absolutely superb. Really, really energetic, great band with a great set of songs. And so on the outside, you could look at them and say they were a great band, they made one great album, they made several great singles, and then they finished. And I think to a lot of people, that's probably what they think. I mean, obviously now we've got the internet and people can research all this sort of stuff. So they know all the gritty details and, and all the what happened in detail. And so this then brings me on to this docudrama. Because of the fact that there is all this detail around, you've got to get these things right. Now, it's not a straightforward, this is what kind of happened documentary style. I mean, if you want the final word on the Sex Pistols, then you need to see The Filth and the Fury, because that documentary's got everything in it and it's really well told by all the band members, and it is a very, very, very well made documentary. I think that's probably the finest work Julian Temple's ever done in actual fact. But this whole docudrama is based on Steve Jones's story. And the first thing that struck me was when the character comes onto screen, I thought, isn't he a bit old, the actor, isn't he a bit old for someone who's kind of, supposed to be like 16, 17? But then you look at old pictures of the band, and the band members, to me anyway, they kind of look older than they actually were. And I think this is just a thing about old photos of people, that they do generally just look older. It's like if you see any old photos of Buddy Holly. I mean, Buddy Holly was what, 21, 22 when he died? Yet you see an old photo of the Crickets and they all look like men in their 40s. I think that's just the way of the past, really. But no, it's funny, the actor that played Steve Jones, as soon as I saw him, I thought he looks actually more like Bill Bruford from Yes, but anyway. Anyhow, so the story starts with Steve Jones's home life, and this is something you can't really argue with because it's about himself, and his home life was pretty rubbish. And you can see why he wanted to rebel and wanted to make something of his life. And Malcolm obviously took him under his wing a bit, and his loyalty always stayed with Malcolm McLaren, not always to the best for everybody else and himself, but that's kind of what happened. And so the story moves on, that the band form, they start playing gigs. I mean, most of you know the Sex Pistols story. But the one narrative in the whole drama that I think most people are going to think, oh, I didn't know about that, was one of the main characters in the whole film is Chrissie Hynde. Now, you read any books about the Sex Pistols or any articles, you don't really hear her name mentioned very much. You hear mention of people like, Billy Idol and Susie Sue that used to follow the band around, Shane MacGowan who used to follow the band around. Incidentally, I didn't notice Shane MacGowan actually being featured as a character in it. I mean, he might have done, and I just missed it. I mean, there was a very, very short bit where you see the Susie Sue character, and a very short bit where you see Billy Idol, but most of the hangers-on don't really get featured in the film at all. But yeah, so there was obviously this kind of love story between Steve Jones and Chrissie Hynde that goes all the way through. I'm going to give you some spoilers now, so if you don't want to know, then you can whiz on about 5 minutes. But you know, the actual ending of it ends with the forming of the Pretenders, which I thought was quite interesting. But you know, there was obviously something going on, but you know, she wasn't one of the main hangers-on that you always saw in all the sort of archive footage. But anyhow, the documentary carries on. You know, all the stuff happens that you kind of expected to happen. So there's quite a few things in the Pistol story that weren't really mentioned. I mean, there was nothing really about when they did their tour under the pseudonym because they have, you know, because of the controversy and stuff. They reenacted the whole Bill Grundy thing. They reenacted the some of their early TV appearances. Now, one of the great bits of cinematography about this film is they shot it all in 4:3, not in widescreen 16:9. And in doing so, as you watch it, you don't even notice that it's in 4:3, to be honest. But what it does mean is they could integrate all the archive that because there is a lot of archive footage in this documentary. I mean, also of other bands and stuff, little tiny clips. So, you know, they must have spent a long time getting clearance for everything. But they were able to seamlessly join in the archive to the stuff that was filmed for the film. Now, two things here. There's one bit where Tony Wilson's introducing them when they appeared on So It Goes, and then they reenact the performance because there's no actual Pistols music in the documentary. All the music is played by the actors that are doing it, and I think that is one of the things that makes it a much more believable film. And in the same way, I'm a big fan of the TV series Nashville because the actors are musicians. And I think when you see some of the older documentary type films, I mean, this film isn't a documentary, it's a drama, and some of it's made up. But when you see some of the older ones made about bands where it's so obvious the actors are not playing their instruments, it just looks a bit naff. And I think now, whenever there's going to be a music-based film made, the actors have got to be musicians, or else you don't get that kind of realism. But now, integrating the archive in with the action, I think works really well. Now, there's a few other bits in the film, like there's the bit where Steve Jones steals a load of equipment from David Bowie at the Hammersmith Odeon. You know, did that happen, or was that made up for the film? I don't know. But there's another scene in the film where he goes back to Hammersmith Odeon, he steals a load of gear off Hawkwind, and then they beat him up. But then in the film, there's no mention of like when Sid was living in a squat with Lemmy. I thought that might have been mentioned. There's all sorts of details. Now, as the film goes on, there's one very quite disturbing. I mean, it's not a happy film either. It's pretty full on and grim all the way through, more or less. But there's the bit about the song called Bodies, which was about a girl that went to see the band, and she'd had like an abortion, and the fetus was in a carry bag. It was really grim, and it really obviously disturbed John Lydon a lot. But I thought it was a really well handled piece of drama. Actually, I think Danny Boyle did a very good job on that, because it is really disturbing, and that really came across. And actually, there's been a lot of this talk about how, you know, John Lydon hates the film and blah, blah, blah. And yeah, he wasn't involved, but I think he comes out of it pretty well, actually. I think they've been actually pretty respectful to him. Now, I don't know what John Lydon thinks about it. I'm sure he's going to talk about it at some point in the future. But I think he kind of came out pretty well. Anyway, moving on as the story goes on, then we have the section where Sid joins the band. Now, it's not a chopped down Sid and Nancy film with the Sid bit. In fact, Sid's not actually in the story. I mean, he only comes in like episode 5. But I think they actually tell the Sid and Nancy story probably as convincing as anything else, and actually the shorter section probably makes a lot more sense. But Sid joins the band. Now, the one bit of this Pistol story I didn't actually know, because I knew he never played on the album, and it's because he'd caught hepatitis and he had to go into hospital, and they tried. I think he did sort of wander into a session to play on a bit, but obviously Steve Jones played everything, and the way they reenact the recording of the album actually I think was one of the most enjoyable bits. Where, because obviously when you record, you lay down the rhythm track, which is the bass and the drums first if you're doing it in bits. And what the Pistols did is they laid down the rhythm guitar and the drums, and they added the bass afterwards. And I think that's kind of what gives the album so much energy, because you got this really ching 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 guitar all the way through, and they're adding little riffs and hooks and stuff in it. I mean, Steve Jones didn't play the guitar when the band started, but if you listen to the album, which was made less than 2 years after Steve Jones started playing the guitar, because I think he started playing at sort of the very end of '74, and then it was early '77 that they made the album. So yeah, about 2 years. It's got this great sound. This big thick sound of doubling up the rhythm guitar parts and then bringing the bass in afterwards. And I think that's one of the reasons it's almost got this timeless energy to it. But anyway, I enjoyed the bits where they were making the album and stuff. I mean, there's lots of other stuff. There's all the sort of fights and things in there, and then there's the sort of the fight that happened based around Bob Harris, and I've kind of heard that story before. In fact, I think Bob Harris might have even mentioned something about it on a Rock on Tours podcast a little while ago, but I can't remember the full details. Anyway, so it then goes on all the way through to the end. Now, this is the bit I was a bit disappointed with, because they show the ending of the band, the last gig at Winterland, the American tour, all the chaos that carried on. Now, I would like to have seen, I think maybe it could have done with another episode, where they go on, they do all the bits that happened after John left. So we're talking about when they went to Rio. So I didn't realise they went to Rio straight after the American tour. So they went to Rio, met Ronnie Biggs, they recorded all this stuff for the Rock and Roll Swindle film, which they all appeared in. There's a bit about when they went to Paris, when Sid Vicious did that My Way thing and made the film and stuff. And then they obviously you've got the bit where, he finds Nancy's body covered in blood, and then when he dies. And then, but we don't really see much else. Now, it would have been, even if it was only a 15-20 minute segment, would have been the story of how the band ended up getting back together in '96, and the fact they appeared on Top of the Pops. That would have made, I think, a bit more of a positive, uplifting ending. I mean, they did kind of end it a bit more uplifting by reenacting the kids' party that they played at Christmas '77, when they did a tour, and they played this kids' party up north for the striking firemen's families, of which there is actually footage of that, and I think that appeared on that last box set thing that they did. And I think there's a documentary on BBC4 they did about it. And that's the other thing, actually. There's another really cool bit in the film where they meet Julian Temple, and Julian Temple just happened to... I mean, this is probably made up, but it's a good bit of made up if it is, where he turns up to an early show or an early event with his cine camera, and he just says... And Malcolm tries to get rid of him, and he says, no, I just want to archive this, because this is a major event that's happening. And so one of the great things that Malcolm did do is having Julian Temple film everything that was happening, and that's why The Filth and the Fury is such a great documentary, because everything that they did is kind of there on 16mm film, and particularly the most moving bit I think of that is that interview with Sid Vicious where he's sat on a deck chair, you know, opening up his heart to Julian Temple. And I'm surprised that didn't make an appearance in the film either. But again, the whole film was based on Steve Jones's book. So I'm guessing that Steve Jones just wanted to tell everything from his perspective. Because, you know, Paul Cook, the drummer, he hardly is mentioned in the film, really. I mean, he's there, he's playing, but he's not a major character in it at all. I mean, Chrissie Hynde's a way more major character than he is, as is, you know, people like, you know, Jordan and Vivienne Westwood. Actually, it was quite funny because mentioning Paul Cook, because I actually randomly met him in London last November in Shepherd's Bush. I was with a friend of mine who knew him, and out he popped from the middle of nowhere. Anyhow, another thing that kind of got me a bit with the documentary is there was literally no mention or recreation of any of the other bands that the Pistols played with. I mean, you know, there was no Damned, there was no Clash, there was no Buzzcocks, there was no Johnny Thunders. It was literally just the band and nothing else. Now, obviously, that was kind of deliberate. But I think if you were going to do an all-encompassing picture of the whole thing, you thought they might have maybe, at least in passing, had some of the other bands of the time in it. Or, I mean, Don Letts, there's a very small bit where you see a little bit of Don Letts DJing at a party, so that kind of tipped the hat a bit. But yeah, there was really no mention of any other bands at all. And the other thing I suppose that does come across is that, you know, Malcolm really wasn't this great person. He was kind of winging it as much as anybody else was at the time, but he just managed to be, you know, a good raconteur and was good at being able to, you know, talk people into doing stuff. But yeah. But in conclusion, I think for a piece of filmmaking, I think it's been done really well. There is a lot of attention to detail. I mean, you know, a lot of the gear that they used is all period correct. A lot of it came from Chris Hewitt up in Cheshire, who I'm friends with on Facebook, and he runs a company that supplies audio equipment to the film industry. And he did Bohemian Rhapsody, did Rocket Man, and he's done this, and he's done countless other things. And yeah, so, you know, everything kind of looked correct. And that's another thing you get now in a lot of films, is they've got to keep everything accurate, because there's going to be somebody on the internet that's going to point out that something's not correct. It's like the guitar Marty McFly plays in Back to the Future was apparently 2 years too new for the period that it was set in. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed my little ramblings about what I thought of the Pistols documentary. I mean, I dare say some of you have probably already seen it, and if you have, please leave a comment below and let me know what you think. And, you know, if you agree with what I think or disagree, you know, let me know. As I said, I'm no expert on the world of punk rock. You know, I know a lot of bands, I've seen bands. As I said, this is the only punk album I actually own. And you know, I should really own a few Damned albums. Well, I suppose I own Phantasmagoria, but that's not really punk, is it? Or the one that followed. I mean, I've supported them, but I don't own their classic albums. Bit naughty, that, really. Anyway, hope you enjoyed this video. If you do, please like and subscribe, and I'll see you on the next one.